Good evening. This is the Cataclysmic Sin File. Darren Aronofsky's mother. The first thing you'll probably be wondering after seeing the promotional materials for this movie, which feature Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem in a sort of Rosemary's Baby / Repulsion / any sort of Polanski film from the 60s and 70s situation, will be, why is this being covered by somebody who talks about disaster movies? Is this supposed to indicate that this film is a metaphorical disaster, so to speak, or critical disaster? In some people's minds, it is actually that bad. Some people absolutely hate this film. And to their detriment, quite frankly, I think this is a film that is just brilliant. Absolutely sublime. This is one of the best films I've seen this year, and possibly this decade. It's an unusual sort of character study of a woman sort of isolated in this country house that is literally isolated from the rest of the world. It's in the middle of a forest. A character played by Ed Harris pops up at this house. He's a fan of Javier Bardem's character, who is this poet. Bit of a struggling sort of poet. He doesn't really write that often. George R. R. Martin poets. Ed Harris himself, in the character played by him, has a terminal illness. So he's sort of trying to contact this man who means a lot to him in his final days. Next thing you know, Ed Harris's wife, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, pops up. Javier Bardem, this incredibly sort of generous, humanist, philanthropic poet, is just welcoming these two into his home. With one weird exception. In his study, there is a sort of a crystallized burnt glass remain. For some reason, Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer go into the study and break the damn thing. Javier Bardem becomes absolutely livid and seals the room up. But after that, he seems completely fine with still allowing Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer to actually stay at the house. It was once a visit. Now they're sort of just occupying this space. And by the way, there's a very deliberate point about how I'm not actually giving away names to these characters. Actually, the film doesn't give any of these people names, and there's a very specific reason for that, which I'll get into when I get into the spoiler part of the review. There's this whole sort of creepy, unnerving dynamic going between these four characters in this house. And then their sons, the Michelle Pfeiffer and Ed Harris's characters' sons show up. And well, I suppose I should actually put a spoiler tag right now, because this whole confrontation, and I'll pause for a second, so spoiler reticent people can just toddle along. Good, you're gone. Okay, so basically this confrontation between these two sons that arrive leads to one of the sons killing the other right in front of Jennifer Lawrence. It's bizarre and it's out of left field. This leads to a wake at the house of Javier Bardem and Jennifer Lawrence. And so all these people sort of come in, and they're all initially sort of mourning for the loss of this son who was killed in that very house. Automatically sort of alarm bells are going on about just the logistics of all of this. Why would a wake be sort of held immediately after the death of the son at the house where he was murdered? And then throughout the film, Jennifer Lawrence has been trying to renovate the house. She's been decorating it, she's been painting the walls, and then suddenly some of the people there start helping her with that, but they don't do a very good job. Whilst other people just kind of invade space. There are these two characters that start having sex in Bardem and Lawrence's bedroom. In another part of the house, this woman keeps sitting on the kitchen sort of sink area, so to speak, and putting pressure on it, despite the repeated warnings of Jennifer Lawrence's character. And eventually the damn thing breaks, and there's this whole flood, so to speak, that happens, and just this causes Jennifer Lawrence to snap and get all these incredibly rude, obnoxious people out of the house. And Michelle Pfeiffer's sort of just there glowering. They all sort of bugger off. And that's the end of the second act. Throughout this whole thing, I'm really trying to figure out what exactly it is that's going on here. The thing I was starting to believe was that the husband may have been gaslighting her, that somehow this was all a ploy to send the wife insane, rather, by having all these sort of mad fans come to the house and do incredibly obnoxious things which the husband would then sort of dismiss offhand as though it's no big deal. Also, admittedly, I was thinking about more far-off possibilities, like it was all a dream or something like that. Like, one of the theories going through my head was that the film's called Mother. So there's a big thing about birth and motherhood and creation and all that. So I was thinking perhaps this is the dying fantasies of a woman who's dying in childbirth. So we enter into the third act. By the way, if you're still here after the spoilers warning, leave now if you haven't seen this film, because my God, this is where it gets so bizarre, so out of left field, batshit crazy, and needs to be seen to be believed. Do not continue to watch this review if you have not seen this film. That is an order. That is an absolute order, okay? Go. Leave. Now. I mean, I'm not very good anyway, so it should be easy. But okay, if you're still here, let's get to this. Months later, Javier Bardem is finally writing this new set of poems, and apparently they've been released or something, and they're successful, and this is all very good. And so Javier Bardem and Jennifer Lawrence are about to have a romantic evening. Oh, also incidentally, throughout the film there's been this sort of tension between the two about how sort of Javier Bardem seems to have difficulty making love to Jennifer Lawrence's character. Jennifer Lawrence wants a baby or something like that, but Javier Bardem's sort of reluctant to give it to her, but he seems to love her very much. Like, it's a complicated dynamic. He finally does actually manage to have sex with Jennifer Lawrence, work for his problems. So she's pregnant now as well. Okay, so they're having this lovely romantic dinner. She's pregnant, and suddenly a bunch of fans just come to the door. Now, of course, Javier Bardem is incredibly sort of reluctant at first to sort of let them in. He's appreciative of his wife's concerns, but he still does anyway, because, they're his fans. They're here for him. At first, he just talks to people outside while she's waiting in the dining room for him to come back and have their dinner. After a while, though, she sort of goes to the bathroom, and then people have been allowed in to go to the bathroom. At first, it's all rather innocent, like it just seems that this child needs desperately to go to the bathroom, and Jennifer Lawrence is, of course, fine with that. But then this other guy is sort of there. And I don't think he's even he's urinating in the bath or something. She walks through the house and she starts seeing that more people are just sort of barging in. There's the woman, for instance, who I think is taking the bloody telephone out of the wall. And it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. More people are sort of coming into the house. And I was thinking, what the hell is going on? Like, this is truly sort of bizarre. And eventually things start breaking and getting violent. His publicist is there as well, who's played by Kristen Wiig of all people. And she, sort of bubbly sort of individual who then sort of gradually gains more menacing elements as she starts to kind of rally some of these people to her side. And I know that sounds absolutely bizarre in the context of like a bunch of fans in this small house, but believe me, that's not even the beginning. Things get so violent that the police get there. Now, this, what I think was the final point in the film where I thought that it was going to be revealed to sort of be more or less exactly how I see it, like this was going to turn out to be a gaslighting ploy. Because after this, a bunch of policemen go into the room with their guns and everything, and Jennifer Lawrence is sort of on the floor about to be arrested. Somebody, I think, shoots the policeman. And then, out of nowhere, there are explosions in the house. And Jennifer Lawrence, mostly in single shots, kind of wanders through the house. And I shit you not, a bunch of women start to be sort of put into a pen, a barbed wire pen, like something out of the Holocaust, and by a bunch of, really creepy men, and start pleading, so to speak, for Jennifer Lawrence to let them free. And then there's Kristen Wiig as the publicist, with a bunch of people on the floor, all sort of tied up, and her with a gun, and she's shooting them as she goes down. And then, somehow, it seems that a whole religion has started in the house. A religion. And there are rival armies. There are people who are fighting in the name of the poet. Then there's shells that are going off, and gunfire, and it's a battlefield. And all this imagery that particularly recalls the last 100 years of history starts popping up everywhere, of concentration camps, and mass graves, and crying women and babies, and just theocracies and dead people everywhere. There were only two possibilities. Either the Jennifer Lawrence's character had gone insane, which to me made the whole thing seem like a rather pointless film. It didn't seem to be a sort of impetus for insanity. Like it was never established she was trying to recover or something from a breakdown before. It was either that or the film was a metaphor. As this full-on war is sort of going on in the confines of this house, eventually Jennifer Lawrence is sort of taken by soldiers that are sort of loyal to her cause, with Javier Bardem sort of also with her, and they retreat into the study, the one that was sort of barricaded earlier. Now, I knew the film was a metaphor now, but I wasn't quite sure what it was for. And then the baby was born. She does not want to yet let Javier Bardem take it and show it to the people, which is what he seems to want to do, even though he's sort of saying, no, I don't want to do that, I just want to hold my son. But she doesn't let him. She stays there with the child, clutching its arm to her chest. And Javier Bardem's character doesn't do anything. He just stands there. And he sits there, and he sits there, and he sits there, and days go by until finally she falls asleep. And when she wakes up, the baby's gone. He's taken the baby. He's been waiting for her to fall asleep. And so she rushes out into the mesh of people, and the baby's sort of being presented by Javier Bardem. He's showing it to all his insane acolytes, and suddenly they take the baby, and they're handling it horribly, and just shuffling it, and suddenly you hear this cracking sound, and you realize the baby's spine has been broken, and there's this altar, and Jennifer Lawrence walks to it, and it's just the remains of the baby, what is left after it has been consumed by these people. They ate a baby, and she just looks at it, and she looks at her husband. She screams, and she starts attacking people. I think she has a knife or something, and she kills one of them. It's incredibly cathartic, but eventually they sort of overwhelm her, and they start beating her. And then Javier Bardem's character tells them to stop, and he comforts his wife, and then she sort of is demanding vengeance and fire and fury, and he says, but they should be forgiven. And they're all incredibly humbled and saddened by what just happened. They want a second chance, as though they can wipe the slate clean. And the character, Jennifer Lawrence's character, just says no. And she goes ballistic. And she starts fighting for all these people. And she tries to get down to the basement, okay, where there's this really sort of faulty boiler down there, with I think a fuel tank as well. She sets the house on fire. Not even fire, she blows up the house. It's all incredibly cathartic as the whole of this metaphorical human race is just consumed. Then Javier Bardem, who is completely unharmed by the explosion, walks up to the charred remains of his wife and asks for something more. He asks for her heart. She loves him despite everything, despite his willingness to forgive any atrocity that his fans commit. So he takes her heart, literally, like the thuggy priest, and he tears it out. A bit more gently than tear, but he does yank it sort of out, and she then dies, and the heart crystallizes, and he puts it in what remains of the study, and we realize that thing that was broken earlier by Ed Harris's character was the crystallized remains of the last woman of this type. Then Javier Bardem's character recreates the whole house from scratch, along with a completely new woman. That's the end of the film. So, 100% confirmed at this point for me that it was a metaphor. And I had sort of figured out what it was a metaphor for at this point, but it's the moment where it becomes brilliantly clear, and the whole film just kind of completely comes together, is during the credits. The usual sort of scrolling affair. You see Javier Bardem's name and Jennifer Lawrence's name, and you see what the titles of their characters are. Jennifer Lawrence is called Mother, lowercase, and Javier Bardem's character is called Him. His character is the only character that has an uppercase letter to begin his name. Every other character has a lowercase letter. And now Darren Aronofsky has confirmed that what you're thinking right now is absolutely true. Javier Bardem is God. He is the representation of God, the Semitic God, really. And basically the whole film has been an adaptation almost of the Bible, really. You start off with Genesis, and you have the world created with Mother being Mother Nature, her husband, the God himself, and then man is created, Ed Harris. There's a moment where you can see him sort of vomiting into the lavatory, Ed Harris's character, and he's got a sort of raw area on his ribs, which is, of course, the rib that was taken to form Eve. Of course, then Michelle Pfeiffer's character pops up, Adam and Eve. And who was birthed by Adam and Eve? Cain and Abel. Cain, of course, killed Abel. Much like the children of Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer, the elder kills the younger. And there's blood, and there's a stain that remains. And once she goes down to the basement where the stain leads, there's this boiler, of course, which is supposed to indicate mankind's worthiness of destruction. But God ultimately expects, better things of his humans, so to speak. Even after he banished Adam and Eve from his study, the Garden of Eden, after they touched the forbidden fruit, which was the weird crystal thing. So then you have all of the humans congregating. The people suddenly just appear out of nowhere. And, of course, they lead sinful lives. They have sex in the spare bedrooms, or main bedrooms. I think it was the main bedroom. After their arrogance becomes too great, the sink breaks, and the great flood happens. Oh, and all this time, humans are inspired by the original works of the creator, of Javier Bardem's character. These original bunches of poems. But he can't write his new poems. But once all these people are banished, it's at that point where he writes his new poems, the New Testament. And his son is born, Christ. And then everything that happens after the crucifixion happens. Their son is killed by man, with a really literal representation of the Eucharist. And yet God still is willing to forgive his people. Much like in Christianity, perhaps, the death of his child was even supposed to release his subjects from the torment of responsibility for their own sins of the past. Everything goes to hell. And then Jennifer Lawrence decides to send the humans there too. The place is to be blown up, to be destroyed. Mother Nature will have her vengeance. Every man and woman in that house was completely, utterly indifferent to the state of the home, to the state of the place. They trashed it, they destroyed it. One or two humans tried to help superficially decorate it with paint, but it was very much superficial help. Even when we try to get things right, we get things wrong. And I think Aronofsky is perhaps a little bit too unfair on the human race there. What else can we do but try? But still, that's beside the point. Everything is destroyed. Mother Nature has had it with everything. But ultimately, and this is the interesting part, Javier Bardem's character still has the greater power here, and he simply recreates what was destroyed. Mother Nature can burn this universe to the ground, this planet, but she cannot hold the ultimate power of creation, which of course Javier Bardem's character has, which is particularly ironic as she, as a woman, is the one who holds the literal organ that creates life. I had never in my whole life thought about how, particularly under sort of the Semitic ideology, the three-way relationship between God, man, and nature. I'd always considered how man and God related, or how man and nature related, but always as two separate things, with God of course being cast as the ultimate power, as with nature in her narrative, and of course man cast as the arrogant, impertinent arm lower who feels that they can assume the greater power of these two entities to which they stand against. But I'd never considered how the power dynamics worked for all three at the same time. As I looked up the film and the reactions to it, there's actually quite a lot of literature about this subject, and I mean, many people have also said that this goes quite a lot into feminist criticism and ideology and things like that, and I can completely 100% see that. But as a theologian, as a very amateur theologian who's hasn't even finished reading the Bible yet, but as somebody with sort of an interest in that, this film really struck me as something quite unique, particularly for a mainstream Hollywood production. I'll be interested to see if it does actually get any recognition at the next Oscars, because at the very least, technically, it's something to behold, particularly the sound design. The sound design for this film is simply amazing. It is so sharp and crisp. The way it deals with high frequencies versus low frequencies, it's so perfectly realized. I can understand why people hate this film. For one thing, it's the type of metaphor that is both incredibly sort of subtle to some and incredibly blatant to others, and people will hate it on both counts. It's the Bible, for heaven's sakes. At the same time, people will probably be so distracted with the in-your-face nature of the third act that a lot of that stuff earlier will probably be forgotten by them because of their sheer sort of obsession and anger almost with that third act. I've heard lots of people talk about this like it's a metaphor for the creative process, so to speak. That the first two-thirds are Aronofsky himself as artist, or as Javier Bardem, trying to create something that has meaning and beauty, and that's sort of original. But as the third act happens and he gets fans for his actions, and his writing sort of becomes unrestrained, you see how much sort of creativity and originality can sort of lead to complete destruction. It's like the mind overdoses, so to speak, with ideas. I think the people who say this are people who actually didn't really like the film and are trying to sort of wrap it up as Aronofsky deliberately trying to be incendiary and saying something that's ultimately sort of an insult to his own ambitions. I mean, much the same thing sort of happened with Lars von Trier when he did Antichrist and Melancholia. People were saying, oh yeah, Lars von Trier is kind of deliberately taking the piss here. I don't think he was deliberately taking the piss. I think he's really depressed and he just was going for more outrageous content than before. And that's saying something from the man who did The Idiots. But this, my friends, my darling viewers, is not a metaphor for creativity. And it is not Darren Aronofsky taking the piss. This is a film with a very intense environmental message. I don't know how theological Aronofsky is in terms of like his actual beliefs in these systems. I think Aronofsky's very much of taking a type of atheistic point here about the dangers of faith and how it can cloud our minds, and also a critique of the idea of God, really. And I mean, there is a type of cruelty that the one thing that people always criticize the idea of God for being is too cruel. But this film takes an interesting line in that one of the cruelest aspects of God can actually be his more merciful elements. This is very much a film that isn't too fond of the idea of the New Testament God to some degree, the one who will forgive these horrid individuals, these criminals from history, these tyrants, these genocidal maniacs for their indiscretions, just because they say sorry. Ultimately, if there is a positive message to this film, it's be kinder to the environment, be gentler to it, because it's putting up with enough of your crap. And I admit, if with the positive message of the film, Aronofsky, as I hinted earlier, sort of shoots himself a little bit in the foot in that he seems to indicate that individuals who do actually attempt to help the environment also could be hurting the environment at the same time, or at least doing something that's completely superficial and insignificant. I think if you go with the latter interpretation, that he's talking about superficial, insignificant contributions that people make to environmental actions, it all works a bit better, because then the message is, it's not that you can't do things that are useful for the environment, it's that you're just not really trying. But to sort of get to the reason why I, the disaster critic, am doing the review, well, it should be obvious now, because the film, at least as a metaphor, is a film about universal destruction. The house is not only the Earth, but potentially the whole universe, and it blows up spectacularly, like the freaking Sept of Baelor. Yeah, that's why I'm covering it. And I just felt I needed to get my thoughts down on this one. So, if any of you like these sorts of reviews, I don't imagine you will, because I imagine my opinions are kind of not that interesting. But anyway, although maybe my jokes aren't that interesting, maybe they're both not very interesting. Just you judge. You can't. You people who watch my vids, just to comment down below. Yep. This is the Cataclysmic Sin file, and there's a fly in the room.